I'm going to take a look at GMT's SpaceCorp by John Butterfield. The fact that it was Butterfield is one of the things that attracted me to it. Yeah, I'm walking on bubble wrap because of my feet. But it looked very Euro, and it is very Euro in a lot of ways. However, now that GMT's fall sale is back in existence and everything, I ended up putting in an order for it under the fall sale conditions. And I'm glad I did, because even though it is Euro, it's kind of interesting. Basically what it is a more abstracted version of High Frontier in terms of flavor, type, etc. Now, if you're interested in kind of getting the basics of the game down, there are other people who are doing how to plays, etc. Don't look at this as that. This is just to fit my normal requirements in terms of, hey, this is how I put out my videos, and I don't want to violate my my sort of standard pattern. But I'm going to be basically reading out of the rule book as I go through the rules. So go to somebody else. I'm not the person to teach you how to play the game. Now, more to my history in the game, or how I approached it, etc. I did end up playing. I don't know if I played it once or twice. I may have played. I'd have to look on Board Game Geek to see which it was. I may have played the very, very little scenario once. I think I played it and screwed up enough that I turned around and played it again. Now, it's very easy to mess things up in this game. So when you get to my playthrough, I am probably going to make mistakes. That's no shock in general. But even though I have played this before, which is kind of unusual for most games that I'm looking at recently, at least most newer games that I'm looking at, it is something that has mechanical difficulties, and of course I'm going to be playing it as I usually do, where I'm playing it all 4 players solitaire instead of it does have its own solo rule book. Let's take a look at some of the stuff you have. First of all, there are 3 eras in the game, and you can configure it so that you can play 1, 2, or 3 of those eras. And in order to cover that, they have this Mariners map. On the other side of it is a board that's going to be useful for technological improvements on the other maps. There is an additional set of 2 maps which covers moving out beyond the asteroid belt and then moving out onto an interstellar scale. Like I said, very much like what you do in High Frontier, except done in a different sort of flavor, and just a different manner in terms of the details of the game. Here you're not going to be worrying about trying to piece together rockets out of spare parts or something. You have extra player sheets, these player mats here. The game only holds 4 players, but it's got different configurations of these cards depending on what eras you're going to be playing in. And then it also has components to support solo only play. The map itself, let's take a look at it, is divided into, and I don't know the official terms for things. There's no map key, of course, but we're going to call these regions or something like that. And these are actual sites within the regions. All right, and it costs to move between sites in a region, but it costs more to move from region to region. You have the deck of cards, which consists mainly of cards like this. There are a number of these as well, which are sort of special bonus action cards. Everybody starts with the same hand at the beginning of the Mariners game, which is, I'm going to be playing all 3 together. Everybody starts with the same set of cards, which is a chemical drive, which allows you to move 1, and a time card, which allows you to basically double an action, or to use the same action for two different teams. And let's see what we got here. So this is going to be an available set of cards that you're able to sometimes pick up out of that out of the offering there, and when they get cleared, new ones show up. On the other hand, you also have the capability to draw from the top of the deck. And in fact, what I found, at least in the early game, was that it was easier to pull from the top of the deck. We'll see why that is, because I don't really remember the why. Your little colored cubes are your teams. You have 4 of them in the game, but you only start off with 2 of them on the board. You have to either expand into other eras or get certain advantages to allow you to get more teams. These little diamonds are the movement costs between the regions, as we'll call them. You have these discovery chits. When you reach a site, you flip over an appropriate discovery chit. And so for here, you have E1 and E2 chits. What else do we have here? I think we're ready to start going into the play of the game. This stuff's for solo play only. This is some quick hints at, oh, I see one major thing we haven't covered. This is for quick hints for distances if you want to count the distance from Earth to some other place. So to the lunar Lagrange points, it says it costs 4. Well, that's because it costs 2 to leave Earth gravity, 3, and then 4 to land on the lunar Lagrange point. I think these are just numbers for plotted movement or something like that if you end up doing that. The other thing I missed was this sucker here. Okay, so this is just a victory point track, basically. And your goal in the game is to collect that up. It's profits for your company, but it includes other things that relate, that give you victory points without necessarily seeming like really necessarily profit. Then these are the contracts. And for each era, one player who reaches that contract first will get a chance to get to that. So like the first time somebody does a production action, they can move this here, and then they get the benefit for that, which is two victory points. Okay. Yeah, let me think what else. You've got a player aide card, which is divided into a number of things. And there's one for each player. There's also, again, more solo components for you. You, of course, have your sequence of play here. Okay, some of the cards are edge cards, which are kind of play at any time. They may be delimited by the effect. Capabilities are limited by which game they're in play for. Here are the different actions that you can do in a turn. And then here are the different bases that you can build and all their effects through each of the different eras. And then some special rules, how you prepare the game for the next era. Because really, in a sense, what you're doing when you switch eras is you're setting up a new game. You maintain your victory condition and maybe some production, and we haven't talked about these either, and your infrastructure. Okay, let's talk about what's over here. And I'm going to spread these out when I actually play, but I need the rules up right now. So you have a set of different types of bases that you can build. You have a couple extra teams. You have these tracks which allow you to track breakthroughs and adaptations. And I think breakthrough, I don't know, one's genetic and the other is technological. Then you have these slots here. Now that first slot says research infra. We'll look through the rules as we go to see if it says different from this, but as far as I understand, you can't do anything with that. That is always going to be there. You have 2 free research, and it's always available for you. You also have these 3 other infra slots. In one of them, you already have a move one capability. That means anytime you take an action that requires movement, you have that point in your hand. Now, what you'll see is the chemical drive here. You can take an upgrade action and put that here, and then again, this card isn't a one-use card anymore. It's part of your infrastructure. You can always move with that. You can't use time cards to bonus your move card, your infrastructure though. So there's some contemplation of what you do there. These guys don't have any infrastructure on them. These guys produce more options, however, so they're kind of advantageous there. The deck gets more impressive. The cards, there's more of an option of cards, but the way the deck is set up is you shuffle all the cards and the remainder of the time cards. Each player starts with one, but there's additional ones. In the 4-player game, there's 4 additional ones shuffled into that deck. Now, the weird thing about the time cards is they're going to be used in every deck. That same set of time cards, which means that if you're like me and you don't sleeve your cards, some of your cards are going to get worn more than others, perhaps noticeably if you play this a lot. These are really the GMT sort of high-end cards. I don't know how I feel about that. They're probably tougher and less likely to get damaged for the most part, but they're kind of a pain in the butt to shuffle. Because they're very stiff. Of course, if you're going to put card condoms on them anyway, no matter what you do with them, they're going to be hard to shuffle. So there you have it. At least these don't fly all over the place like when you put them in sleeves. Okay, let's start working through the rulebook. The rulebook itself is set up in a kind of a Eurostat fashion, although it does give you this nice components section first. It gives you a setup, and you really kind of have to read through this. It doesn't tell you, I don't know, because it uses a picture and everything, I find it more difficult to process, but it's not too bad. Oh, I didn't explain one of the things. On the back of this board is a place where a bunch of additional cards are going to go. And we'll see those cards. Those are going to be your adaptations and your breakthroughs. Okay, so one of the things about the game is that the game changes significantly between eras. And hence, on here, what you'll see is, let me see. I expect to see something here that I'm not seeing. Yeah. So what you'll see here, for example, SpaceCorp is divided into 3 different eras, and they have different capabilities for those eras. So the type stays the same. The requirements for building are different in each era, and then the benefit is different between the Mariners era and the Spacefarers, Starfarers, whatever eras. So that's kind of a bit of the complexity in the game. Most of these are available, are the same through most of the eras. Some of them, excuse me, aren't even capable of being built in the first era, which is kind of cool, I guess. Okay, let's take a look at what happens in a turn then. So in your turn, and it's just going to go clockwise, you're allowed to do an action. Then you can claim any contracts you're eligible for. Then any opponents who get rewards off of what you did get those. Then you're allowed to do something called a free team transport, a free movement capability, which requires bases and such not. Then you must discard any of the cards that you used that aren't part of your infrastructure. Your infrastructure stays when you use it. And if there's any slots open there, they get filled up for the next player. And then if you have 4 or less cards left in your hand, you get a free draw from the top of the deck, not from the offers pile, which is kind of interesting. The offers pile, at least at the beginning, ends up being pretty weak cards. You know that there are better cards in the deck. Now, they're not at the right at the top of the deck, though. So there's some incentive to, if you need something that's in that offers pile, you draw for it. Or you take it from the offers pile. But very quickly it comes to the point where that deck has like four additional cards in it in the 4-player game. Once those are gone, then you know you're drawing better stuff than what's here. Okay. And each of the games kind of sets up in the same way, each of the eras. All right. And then Revelation and Colonize, those will be happening in the other eras as things that happen. Okay. Let's talk about, I jumped to actions. No, I screwed up there. Okay. In addition, you have edge abilities on cards which you can play during an active player's turn. They might give you some, they might hinder that player. They might give you some bonuses based on that player's action. Okay, let's go to the first thing that you do in a turn is conduct an action. Conducting an action, you declare one thing that you're doing. It's out of this list, and then there's a couple more that become available later. Each of them is handled on this chart here. We'll talk a little bit about them as we go. Upgrade and special are conducted by playing the card from your hand. The others, however, are going to require that you create a number of points with these cards from your hand or from your infrastructure, or maybe from someone else's infrastructure, which is kind of interesting. You can use other people's capabilities, but you have to pay in order to improve your actions on it. The action has a default value of 0 when you declare you're doing it, and you can do the following. You can use your infrastructure on your or another player's headquarters. You can play cards from your hand. You can use the special abilities listed on a base, which might add to your capability, to your numeric values for certain activities. You might have bonuses on a progress card, which is either the breakthrough or adaptations. And finally, you're allowed to spend money, but not in the first era of the game. Well, you're allowed to spend profit in order to improve your capabilities for that one action. Okay. You do multiplication and division on the total sum of all the values you create. You don't get to choose your own order of operations. Okay, so collecting up your points. How is that done? Well, the first thing listed there was use infra from one headquarters. You can choose to use all the infra on any one headquarters, yours or someone else's, towards the action. And each action only uses one type of value, so you could use like all the move values or all the research values or whatever from one player's infrastructure. Now, no cards are expended by this. If you have a card, the cards that you have here, they're available to you forevermore until you replace them. If you use an opponent's infra, however, they will get a reward. Let's talk about the opponent's reward. Whenever you use their base or infra for any activity, that opponent gets a reward when we come here. And you may get multiple rewards in a turn. If you do multiple rewards, you claim them. If any opponents are due rewards, they get them in there. The opponent draws the top card of the deck, not from the offers. If 2 or more players get rewards in the same turn, they get them in turn order. Using infrastructure is not the only way to give people rewards. You also can use their bases for things. Okay. In addition, you have the opportunity to play cards from your hand to add to the value. So if I was using my move 1 here, I could add another move to it here. It doesn't go into my infrastructure. It just gives me a total move of 2 for that turn. You have to match the same stuff in terms of color and type of card. Some of the cards have options on them. You can use them as either of those two things. Okay, the time cards, these can be played along with an action to either do that action twice with two different teams, or take that action with double the value that you otherwise would calculate. Move, produce, and colonize require that you have a base present in order to take the action. Some bases will cause you to get a bonus. So for example, what they give here is the Mariner Spaceport gives you a move to card when you start an action at the spaceport. Okay. If you choose to use the ability of the base, even, you can even do this if a base is required to do something, you give the opponent a reward. They're going to get a card from the top of the deck. This keeps the game moving. If you don't have a good hand and good infrastructure, you might be able to do something using someone else's stuff at a cost. Not to you, actually, but in terms of everybody's paying the cost to that person getting a benefit. Okay. Now, when you reach step 2, if you meet the prerequisites for any of the contracts, you can take them. You can take as many as you like at that time, and you get the reward from that immediately. If you use headquarters, if you use infrastructure, headquarters infrastructure, or any bases of other players, they get their rewards at that point. The next thing you're allowed to do is relocate a team that didn't do an action that turn. The team has to begin at a site with one of your bases. You may travel any distance to another site containing one of your bases, and at least one of those two bases must be a spaceport. Now, this specifies one of your bases. You can't transport teams to someone else's base in the hope of taking advantage of their capabilities. Finally, any cards you used get discarded, and they'll just go up there. And you replenish the empty offer box, and this is really just going over what was here, but if you have less than 4 cards, you draw a card. If you have more than 4 cards, I'm sorry, is it less than 4 or? No, 4 or less. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Some of the cards are edges. They might be an option on that card, or you may have 2 different edges on a card, if I recall correctly. You play these during the time that the card says. So this says when a contract is fulfilled. So somebody just fulfilled a contract. If it's your contract, you get 2 extra victory points. If it's your opponent's, you get 1. Kind of a cool card, just a victory point for nothing. Okay. And there's some instructions here as to the particulars of the edges. Let's take a look at what some of these can do. Well, first of all, you get to choose things. You get to choose between competitors, yeah, this one gives you money if the other person produces. This one allows you, I believe, to steal a card from the offers. This one causes penalties to all players if they don't have their defenses. This one causes a penalty as to infrastructure being thrown away. I don't remember what leak does. Market influence is what we saw up here. Poach, you get to steal cards that the other player is discarding. Sabotage, jeez, I don't remember what that does. You think you prevent players from taking a certain action. All players. And salvage, emptied offer boxes won't replenish until step 5 of your turn, which means when you play that card, you can prevent the offers from replenishing, which means everybody after that card is played doesn't get to see there aren't new cards showing up there, so they pretty much are going to have the choice on certain actions of drawing from the top of the deck or from whatever's left there. They're not going to see more. Okay, the specific actions that players can choose. We're only going to look at the ones in the basic game right now. The rulebook's set up so as we add to the different periods, different things get added and changed in the game. Okay, research. You can take research if you have 7 or fewer cards in your hand. There's no hand limit, but there are limitations to when you can draw cards. So like at the end of your turn, you have to have 4 or fewer to draw. To do research, you have to have 7 or fewer. There might be, through edges, ways to get additional cards, though. I find in the game, unless you're saving up for something that you really need to save up for, it's often good to keep your hand size down to the point where you get the draws, the free draws at the end of the turn, if you can manage. Okay, so with research, you're going to be allowed to draw a number of cards equal to your research value from either the offerings and or the top of the game deck. I don't believe there's anything that improves your research directly. There may be breakthroughs or something that give you extra research bonus, but I don't think there are any cards that allow you to improve your research infrastructure. There are cards that you can play along with your research infrastructure to increase your research, but I don't think there are any that actually lock in there, which I found kind of weird. Move. Move allows you to take one of your teams from its current site and move it to another site. You can't end just floating out in space. You have to always end your turn on a site. The action's total move value has to equal or exceed the distance traveled. The move begins or ends at a site with a base. One of those. The active player can use their own or an opponent's base, but if they use the opponent's base, the opponent will get a reward off of it. Okay, crossing regional borders is the diamond value, and that'll be between every region. And you'll see, the further out you go, the more it starts costing. The other boards have much, much higher costs. These engines don't work on those boards very well if you have them in your infrastructure. They won't be in your hand for long, probably. Okay. So it costs 1 to leave a site and go to space, unless there's gravity. It costs whatever diamonds you want to transit through, and then it costs 1 to land on a site. So for example, if I took off from Earth, well, let's not say from Earth. Let's say I take off from the Solar Lagrange point, and let's say there's bases that make this legal. It costs 1 to go here, then 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to land here on Deimos. Gravity, however, modifies this. To land or take off from a planet from a location with gravity, you have to pay that extra points. So that's where the example comes here. It costs 1 to leave Earth, plus 2 for the gravity is 3, and then 4 to land on the moon or on one of the Lagrange points. No gravity for the moon. That's a little different from from High Frontier, isn't it? Mars has gravity, but not very much. So that gets you kind of the idea there. And this is all about leaving the solar system. So there's nothing, none of the inner planets are in the game at all. And in fact, the race to Mars is kind of a big deal here. But beyond that, the next maps will take you out to the further places. So again, a little bit of a difference from the High Frontier experience. Okay, Mars North and South, this is a special rule here. There's a divide between the two spaces with a cost. And it's a cost almost like a regional diamond there. Mars is divided into 2 sides with a boundary between them. A move from one Mars side to the other costs you 3 move. You don't actually leave the planet, so you can ignore Mars's gravity penalty. But let me see. Let's see how. The total distance is 3 as well. So it's not like you pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just 3 to move from there to there. Okay, the asteroid belt is out here. And the first person who makes it out there will get this first beyond marker. That'll give you some significant bonuses for the next era. And then the second person who gets there gets the second beyond marker. There's no reason to go out there if you're beyond, if the second one's already taken. And that team is frozen for the rest of the era. They'll show up on the next era along with your other teams. We're going to have to swap batteries as we go through the other capabilities. Okay. The next action is the Explore action. This is going to allow you to place a discovery tile, one of these suckers, at the location. It has to have an empty exploration box, i.e. no one's explored it before, and one of your teams in it. And you have to come up with an exploration number in order to do it. If there's no explore cost, for example, the Lagrange points, you can't explore it. But you also don't have to. When a site is explored, you draw the discovery tile from the top of the stack or whatever with the right number on it. So an E1 goes on E1. And it's placed on that space. Some of the tiles, at least later in the game, cause you to discard that tile and replace it with a higher valued tile or something like that you wouldn't normally get. Okay. If the tile has a bonus on the bottom left of the tile, for example, this one gives you a genetic bonus, you get that immediately. There are ongoing benefits on the right of the tile. Oh, this gives you two treasury victory points and a genetic. This will give you P1. Well, what is that? I don't know. And base +2. We'll see that in a moment. P is going to be profit for production. Base +2 means that the cost of a base is changed by that. So this is going to actually be a penalty. It's going to cost 2 more to build a base there. Why? Because those microbes make you sick. Okay, some of the symbols, water and life, can affect which bases you can build on a particular tile, on a particular location. You also have things that give you colony points, which will be used in the further games, further eras. Revelations, not in this game, not in this version, I don't think, but I'm not positive of that. Okay, if a discovery tile's award is shown in red text, it's going to have a special effect that you have to go look up. If the discovery tile directs a tile to draw a tile from a different space, you discard the first and draw another, and then you place your team on top of the newly explored tile, which will be on the board, and it'll be face up so you can see what it actually does, but I don't want to reveal it because I've set up the game. That means that as long as that team's there, I believe you get a benefit. I don't remember quite. I don't think it's a benefit like the others. If somebody else builds a base there, we'll get to that in a moment. With the base here, yeah, you get 2 profit off of somebody else building. Okay, the next, and the exploration is going to cost you the E value of this space. So to get an exploration 1, well, that's pretty easy. Up here, they've got exploration 2s. I don't think they go very high in general. I think 3 is the highest anywhere on the board, but I may be throughout the whole game. But I may be a little mistaken about that. So what that would mean is exploration cards probably don't get that much better. Okay, build. A build action allows you to choose one of your bases, and you've got many different types, that meets the proper requirements. You have to have a team at the site. There can't be a base at that site. There has to be discovery tiles on all the exploration boxes for that site. But at Lagrange points, there are none, so there's no need. You don't have to explore it if there's no exploration capability, but you have to fully explore it. Each site has a build cost, which is its B number. So like this says B2, this says B4. That's how much build point you have to gather to build any base. And then the number of points in cards that you generate and infrastructure, whatever, have to equal or exceed the build points of that location. If you do it at a site where somebody else has discovered it and has their cube still on it, you get the chance to give them two extra profit. Some of the discovery tiles have a cost for modifier for bases. When you build a base, you choose whatever you want from the headquarters that's allowed. Some of them say things like they have a build requirement. The discovery tile has water or a P number, and you just can't build it anywhere else. Okay. Each base has different effects and different prerequisites. Some of the base types have an immediate effect at the time they're built. Some provide you with a benefit for the rest of the game, or whatever, for the rest of the era. Okay. If an active player chooses to use someone else's base for one of the advantages, then the opponent whose base is used gets the reward of a card. Okay, and there aren't a lot of bases in the Mariners section, so this whole chart isn't really as necessary. You can look here. So for the attraction base, this little flag, the bonus is you can only place it where there's a natural wonder, and then that tile gets a little bit better production value. Biolab, the discovery has to have life. When you discover it, your genetics marker moves forward a space. Once it reaches around here, you get a genetic breakthrough. Industrial has to be water or have a P number, but that P number can be 0. And you may double your build value when doing any build actions in that region. Well, in Mars, that can make a big difference, but I guess it could at Earth, but not much. In some of the later, as we move to the other maps, you'll see that this becomes more of an issue. The refinery, the discovery tile has to have a P number. Well, the P number for that tile is increased by 1. Research does nothing. It has no special requirements, but when you build it, you get a card from the offers. That sucks. In the later games, you're going to get advances on your breakthrough track, but such is life. I believe. Let me make sure. No, it's got to be in the very final stage that you're allowed, that you have the option to take a bonus there. And you don't have to. And spaceports can only be built at Lagrange points in this game, in this era. And then you get a bonus move 2 for that space. And team transport, which we haven't gotten to yet, is allowed as long as a spaceport is involved in the movement. The next one's produce. Produce is, again, a point-based system. Now, there are none of them available right off, which is good because nobody's got any capability to build anything, to produce goods. This is going to allow you to generate profit from discovery tiles. Profit is victory points. The tile is eligible if it has a production value and if you have a base there. You don't have to have a team, just a base. The action's total produce value must equal or exceed the number of eligible tiles which you'll collect. And you get profit equal to the P numbers on the tiles which you're allowed to collect from. So a produce 1 lets you produce in one base. A produce 2 allows you to pick 2 different bases with production value and add those up, and then they become victory points for you. Now, early in the game, you probably aren't really that interested in just piling up victory points. But later, at some point, you reach a point where you do want to start collecting victory points, maybe more than expansion. Depends on the circumstances. Okay. Let's take a look at the next one. I guess it's genetics. Genetics is going to allow you to move your tan marker forward. Again, like production, these are cards that aren't available initially, but they're in that first deck. Okay. Once you make it all the way around, you get an advantage. Now, if you make a full orbit, that will happen. That'll give you an advantage either in victory points if you're just playing the first era, or a series of you'll get a genetic advantage when you enter the next era, for example. There might be other things there. I think there's a genetic. Maybe not. I thought there was a genetic bonus. Okay. Upgrade. This is how you build infrastructure. You're allowed to play a single card for infrastructure improvement. It has to say, may upgrade to infra, like this one does. And none of those do. You're able to place it in any of the infra slots, 1, 2, or 3, not the research infra. And if there's another card of the same era already sitting in the box here, that goes back to your hand. So your upgrade costs you at your turn, but you at least end up with the same number of cards, which may not be that good a thing. But if it's from an earlier era, however, you discard it and it's gone from the game, actually. And what are we here? Okay. There's special cards, or special action. Special action says you can do a card like this that just has an effect immediately on it. This one, for example, gives you 2 victory points. Yippee. And we have, again, a list of these. There appear to only be 2 here: antimatter prototype and near deep space probe. I'm not so sure about that. The near deep space probe allows you to explore a tile that you're not at. Okay. At the end of the first era, well, at the end, how does an era end? Well, 6 of the 7 contracts available for that era have been fulfilled. If this happens, each other player gets to take 1 additional turn after the person whose turn that happens in. Might not be the person, someone else might end up fulfilling a contract during another player's turn. I'm not sure how likely that is, how possible that is. Doesn't look like it's very. This could do it. Your genetics has advanced 2 spaces. That could happen in someone else's turn. I hear my owls are active. Okay. When the action draw pile has been emptied, that signals the oncoming end of the era. Now, each active player can pass, and then they don't have a turn for the rest of the era. In the 2-player game, once one player passes, the other player has 1 more turn. In the 3 or 4-player game, it's got to be 2 players who pass. By the way, one thing I haven't mentioned and I didn't handle in the setup yet. In the 4-player game, the 3rd and 4th player each get an extra card at the beginning of the game, and one of them gets an extra profit. Just some bonuses to have for the penalty of going later in the turn. I'm not sure how bad that is. It definitely creates an imbalance. I'm just not sure which way it goes. Okay. If the intercept edge is played after the end of an era is triggered, the extra turn gained from the effect doesn't count against the take 1 last turn. Okay, intercept allows you to get an extra turn. That won't count against the end of turn stuff. Base and infra use, as soon as the end of the era is triggered, the opponent's infra and bases cannot be used until you go to the next era. Okay. Now, each era transition has its own special rules. They're similar, so let's go over the main flow of it, and then we'll get to, how each of the other eras progresses. The only other game I know that has this kind of defined periods to it is La Grande Guerre, but it kind of is cool that this reminds me of that. At the end of Mariners or Planeteers, you go to the next era if you are going to be playing that way. If you have a discovery tile on the board that has a P number and is accompanied by one of your bases, you can fill the legacy production slot with it. If you already have something in the legacy production, you can choose either that or one of the new ones that's there. This will then be a production space. When you do production, you can gain money, you can gain profit from that. Basically, you're just saying, okay, I still have some resources, you know, in the last map we were on, that I can do production actions with. Okay. All the time cards that were used in the current era are set aside. All the action cards that were played as infrastructure stay on your headquarters, but all other action cards leave the game and will be going to additional decks of action cards. Yeah, this game has a lot of cards. A lot of boards. What the hell? They went all out in producing this sucker. Okay. If you're finishing Planeteers, all progress cards remain where they are. Progress cards are going to be on the back of this board, but you also might have some in your hand. Basically, they're things you accumulate through the course of the game. So, and they modify your capabilities. Sometimes kind of nicely. Always kind of nicely. Sometimes kind of in an important fashion. All the playing pieces come off the board. Your teams and bases will be going back here. You'll be able to use them on the next board. Discovery tiles get set aside. And they're removed, well, they get removed from play. And the beyond counters get set aside because each board has a capability to cause that. Then you swap the boards. Now, this board gets replaced with the Planeteers board, which is over there. The Starfarers is on the other side of that. We'll take a peek at those in a moment. And on the other side of this is a board that keeps track of your progress, technological, now, and genetic. Let's see what we got here. Okay. The next one is Planeteers, which is the outer solar system. And you can see it's getting tighter and more crowded. And then we go to local stellar areas, which have significantly different roles. Okay, Planeteers is going to be fairly close to this. There's some big differences when we get to that other map. All right. The Mariners, there's going to be a sideboard there that holds cards, and then you go on to the next era. All right, we're going to pause here for a little bit, but each era has its own setup. Just like this game had its setup, each of the new eras has a setup. So over in the Mariners map, you start off with a base on Earth. When we get over here, your base is the entire inner solar system, and you have a shield factory there. Shield factory is going to play an important part. It didn't exist in the other one, but it allows you to deal with the radiation belt, which starts out here. Higher cost explorations. You'll notice the builds have higher costs. The movement costs start getting larger. Everything just starts getting bigger. Now you're not landing on Jupiter. You better not be. Or anything like that. But yeah. Anything else here? Some calculations for the distances that I find these I used. When I got to these, it just generally was just, you're not going to make these jumps usually from all the way back there. So this little cheat sheet or whatever is very, very useful maybe when you first start playing, you probably don't want to start with the Planeteers section. So let's take a look at what changes. And like I said, there's going to be a place, it's just really a holding point for some other new components, which are these progress cards. And I'll show you pictures within the rule book. I think it's easier that way. I'll take my pipe out of my mouth because it burned down anyway. All right, so you go through a similar setup process to how you set things up here. I didn't really go over that, but you shuffle the discovery piles. You get your two teams at the inner solar station. But here's where things start getting interesting. If you had the first Beyond, you start with access to Ceres. And if you have the second Beyond, I think you start with access to Vesta. And there's slight advantages. So the Ceres one, you get your discovery there. The second Beyond, you just start with your team in Vesta. You don't have a free exploration. You get a time card, and the deck gets the rest of the time cards, the ones that aren't used by the players. 4 new cards show up here. The adaptation and breakthroughs will be played on the back of this map, or I'll be set up on the back of that map. And they really don't have to be there. You could have them just in a pile if you're really cramped for space. And we'll see how I go. Those boxes can go off the board, or off the table, so that won't be a problem. If any player's genetics cube advanced on or beyond the first space of the progress wheel, they'll get an adaptation card to fit that, and then you're ready to go. Okay, what's new? Well, the first thing is there is this radiation belt. Or there's this radiation zone after the asteroid belt. In order to take either a move or build action there, you're going to have radiation shielding, or you'll start killing your people and that cuts into your profit or whatever. Some of the move or build cards will indicate that they have radiation shielding built on them, and they'll say shielded, and you can kind of see it on this card, or you can see it up here. As long as you have a card that is shielded that you're playing, then your action is protected from radiation. Some cards will have a shielded and unshielded value of the same action. However, there's also the shield factory base. Any move that starts from a region with a shield factory, not just that particular site, is automatically shielded, and you get that for free out of the solar system, the inner solar system. Likewise, any build done in the same region as a shield factory, including the turn that you're building the shield factory, I believe, will not pay the radiation penalty. Now, if any part of your move or build is done in radiation and you don't have shielding, you lose $2 trillion bucks. An unshielded move or build anywhere on the Starfarer's board, which is going to be on the other side of this, will cost you 3. If you don't have if you don't have the profit, you can't take the action. Okay. Transit additions. The 4 planetary regions for Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto have some special transit additions. So if you're moving from Saturn's moons out to Uranus's moons, you have to pay an extra 6. It's only 4 to transit into this general region, but if you're actually going to land there, it's going to cost you 10. You know, you're going to have to pay. So let's say you're leaving here. You'd pay 1 to take off, plus 4 is 5, plus 6 is 11, 12 to land. So And that's to take into account the different positions that the planets tend to be in. Again, it's really, really abstract. This doesn't bother me as much as the fixed positions do in High Frontier, just because this is a more abstracted game. But honestly, the scale of the game is enough that these should change significantly, and it somewhat disturbs me. Like, this is like a fixed point in time cost, and that doesn't really make sense, but whatever. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Okay. When you want to take an action, if you don't have enough points, you can spend 1 profit to increase your point value for an action. And you can do this up to 3 profit. Generally, you don't want to do this. 1 point of profit, a victory point in the game, is actually a pretty big deal. But you might be able to get something, you might be able to win a race for one of these or something like that. Okay. Revelation action. There are revelation cards. When this action is chosen, you move the black revelation marker, and that'll get you technological breakthroughs when it swings all the way around. Increased contract awards. Okay. If a contract wasn't fulfilled in the first era, if it's still back here, and you fulfill the second era, you can no longer fulfill the first era stuff. That all becomes unavailable. Then you get the money for both eras that it's filled. So 2 bases beyond Uranus, well, if nobody built the first base on Mars, that's pretty unlikely. You'd get 6. But some of them, it's quite possible. Because like bases in 4 regions or whatever, it might be very, very difficult with 4 players for that to happen. Okay. I found that these did not fill up very well in 4 players. The deck ran out. Players got a lot of turns after the deck ran out, actually. Okay. The Oort cloud is out here. It's like the asteroid belt. First beyond is the first person who gets out there, and you're frozen for the rest of the game, or for the rest of the era once you go out there. The progress cards, here's some examples of these. So an adaptation, this has a prerequisite on it, and I screwed this up when I played last time, that you have to have 2 breakthroughs, 2 of these, in order to get this. And this is a really cool one. It gives you an extra team that you can throw anywhere in the Starfarers region. It's only available once you get to the Starfarers. Sorry. This one, you know, that's kind of nice. Whatever. When you swing around here, you're allowed to pick one of these that you haven't, you don't already have, and that's available. There's only 2 of each, and the first one of each comes with a bonus amount of victory points that you get for being the first person to get that breakthrough. Some will give you a bonus action value. This is not going to be something opponents can use. Okay. And then similar, I'll flip this over and take a look at how Starfarers gets to. Well, first, the end of the era follows the same rules as before, but the setup, we've got a somewhat different setup here. We got primary discoveries, secondary discoveries, and alien discoveries. And we got these things, areas are now a little different. And then there's these little tracks here, which are going to be time delays. When you enter a region or whatever, your team has to work its way towards finding the good stuff there. These are your one-ways that go into something similar to the Beyonds, but instead of how they work in these in the other games, where they transit to a position next the next era, here these just result in profit, and they're very expensive to get to. Let's take a look. Discovery tiles, yeah. You're going to start with 3 teams on the Starfarers board. Now you have 4 on the board. 1 comes from that possible expansion. If you had the first Beyond, again, you start in Alpha Centauri, and second Beyond, you'll start in the Lumen 16. Now, the first Beyond gets you actually on the planet, in the area, so you can start exploring. The second Beyond puts you on the first box of the delay track. Again, you construct a hand much the same way, the deck and hand much the same way as before. Now the Starfarer cards become available. Exploration. You're going to have some different kind of tiles here. These guys. These hexagons. They're colonies. Once you get enough bases in an area, you're able to actually colonize that region as an action. And the colony chits are each, I think they're on the back of here, are each going to have their own special conditions. They might be on this, I don't think so. They each have some symbols on them. And those symbols are then translated over here to tell you what they mean, and spelled out over here. Yeah, I've been talking too much and my voice is shot. Okay. And once you set those up so that they're available for people to look at, then you can move forward. Okay, there are multiplier cards. I think there was something else that provided multipliers, but now there are cards that multiply the value of your total infrastructure plus cards that you play. Interstellar. I gotta stop. Hoping a nice healthy pipe helps here. Believe it or not, it kind of does, but shit, now I've spat all over my game trying to talk while I'm doing that. Okay, the regions have either a star system, or they're one of these empty spaces, or they're an Orion spur, or in the center of the map, your Sol bases, which again start off with a shield factory. The cost of a move to a Starfarer's region is the total cost of the regions crossed during the move. There's no landing or takeoff in this. So you just leave, say, Lumen 30, 60, 90. Boy, those numbers are big though, right? That's why you need these multipliers. The star system is considered to be a single site with multiple exploration boxes. If it has 2 or more stars, it is considered a multi-star system. A star system's name is followed by an explore cost and a build cost. Works a little different from before. The star tracks, when you first enter an area, you place your cube over here, and then each turn it moves down 1 until finally it's present and you can start your exploration, etc. And I can't keep it lit. All right. The Orion Spur. Okay. In order to go out to the Orion Spur, you have to be in the adjacent region to begin with, and you have to have a colony in that region. And then you also have to have the movement cost. And you'll get the victory points for that. And you can see, I mean, the first person who gets there is worth 5 victory points. The second person is worth 2. That's a pretty hefty cost in terms of you're losing a piece for the rest of the game, really. Plus, plus you're spending a good deal of movement to get there. Now, the first person to any of these gets the 5. Other players can't go to the same ones. They wouldn't have a colony there. Colonies, you can only have one colony in a region. Each player, so only one player can have one. So the second and third player to reach an Orion spur get the 2 victory points. You can never end your turn in an empty space. You must always have movement to go through it. There's a concept of nearby sites and regions. Nearby is within 20 distance of whatever is being referenced. So these two are nearby. For colonies. Okay. Now, strangely enough, exploration of star systems, building bases, these are things we kind of already know how to do, but first we're going to talk about colonies, which require you to do these things first, which are different, but whatever. Okay, your action for the turn can be to colonize a region in which all the exploration boxes are occupied by your own bases. You don't need a team. What you do is you calculate out the number of pips on the top of a colony, and you have to match that or exceed it in your colonization action. Discovery tiles may have a colonization value. You add those up. If you already own a nearby colony, you get 1 point. If you have an industrial base in the region, you get 1 point. If there's 2 or more bases in the region, and you have to fill all the exploration spaces, so there will be, it's based on the board, nothing else. You get a point. If you're in the region with a team and you remove it from play permanently, you get a point. The extra people. If you use infra or play cards with a build value of at least 8, you don't normally have to pay points to colonize, or 12 for a multi-star region, it's worth a point. If you spend 5 victory points, you get a point towards this. And then there's an adaptation that has it. If you have enough to match the dots on the colony card or tile, you get that tile, and then you get the bonus of that tile. In addition, you will get CP towards colonizing regions there, the Orion Spur entry capability, and at the end of the era, you're awarded profit based on the number of colonies you control, which is somewhere here, a list of how many victory points additional you get at the end of the game. Okay, exploration. Once you actually reach the star system, i.e. you spent your 3 turns in transit, you're allowed to explore. When you explore, you get discoveries on all the boxes that are there. Primaries in the primary, secondaries on the secondary. Some of them can advance, some of them can turn into aliens, whatever. You draw the tiles needed, and you place them one at a time, taking any immediate effects. And then the exploring team is considered to claim all the tiles. So somebody else would have to pay you if they colonize it, if they build a base on it. 2 of the tiles give you aliens, and they've got specific aliens. The phobes, which relocate one of your teams in that region to Sol. You get kicked back unless you have a specific breakthrough. But you continue with discoveries, but you don't get any further bonuses unless there's a secure base built on the phobe tile. And at that point, benefits for all discovery tiles in the system would be awarded to the player. And the introvs, bases can't be built on the system unless the active player has either cooperative empathy or sensory focus. Contract awards, if prior levels aren't bought, you get the advantage for all the levels that aren't bought. And you get contracts. Building bases. When you want to build a base. You have to build it on all the eligible discovery tiles within a single action. The cost is the build cost for that entire system. So the explore cost and build costs are baked in. Note the explore costs get quite high here. They didn't get much higher on the prior map. A little bit, but now they're getting up into, and the builds are also increasing. Okay, to win the game, you take your victory points on the board, you count the number of colonies that you have, and if there's a tie, whoever has the higher colony value wins out of those. Greater number of adaptations and breakthroughs, and nothing else. I'm not going into the bases. They have different capabilities in the different games, and that's spelled out. So, and we'll worry about that as we're playing. But for example, the Shield Factory isn't even available in the first one. I went through what all the different bases kind of can do in the Mariners section, but I'm not going to waste my limited breath on that. In addition, you could start the game at a later point. You could end the game at an earlier point, and they give you specialized rules for that. You could play the game solo, which has its own whole set of rules that I have no idea about. Finally, there's a planned expansion to the game. The only thing I know about it is that there's essentially special powers that are available. Each player is going to have, they have their own card that gives them some special powers that last throughout the game. Personally, I felt like that was an inappropriate decision, because to me it seems like if these are corporations, corporations are made up of humans. What kind of special powers do corporations have that'll last through generations, I mean, Ford was very innovative at one point in terms of the usage of the assembly line, whatever you want to say. It didn't remain that forever. It started with a benefit. It was a very short-term benefit. So I could see some short-term bonuses for them here. What I would have liked to have seen was a tech tree, maybe using the breakthroughs, etc., that allows you to reach another layer of bonuses. Bonuses that come from coordinating, say, some of those breakthroughs and genetic alterations, or whatever they're called, adaptations. I would be more interested in something like that adds more complexity to the overall game. Not because it makes for a more interesting game by any means, simply because it makes more sense. For the most part, when I played this, it made sense. It felt like a lighter game of High Frontier. One where I'm not like stressing about, can I get there, can I do this? I mean, I can look at my cards and I might have difficulty accomplishing the actions I want to take. There's no question about that, and I have to make some hard choices. But in High Frontier, too often, I looked at the calculations and said, geez, this is rocket science, man. I can't figure out whether I can get there or not. I mean, you can calculate it out. And there's also some chance in High Frontier, which plays into things. And more capability for other people to interfere with you, etc. This is a little bit calmer. Anyway, I'm going to send this up. I will not start playing until I have a voice again. I'm sorry about this. I have not been able to kick this cough. It's been lasting me for, I don't know. I got sick. It felt great. I had a little bit of a cough. It went away after a couple of days. And now I'm back to what I had when I first moved here and was living in the other place in Eugene, and then in Phoenix, I regularly was getting this every year. The last couple of years, I haven't been getting it. But now it's settled in again. I don't know if it's like a reaction to mold or something like that, or if I just was healthy for the last couple of years and now I'm just degenerating to the point of, geez, whatever.